Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Oshkosh. I'm Cheryl Hentz, your host. Very pleased to welcome back to the show someone who was here a lot when she was on our local city council and, whatever else she was on. She was on different committees and so forth. But since she has been elected to the state assembly, this is her first visit here. So welcome, Lori Palmeri, state representative from the 54th Assembly District.
It's good to be back here.
It is wonderful to see you back at this table. We've missed seeing you. So I want to just say we have some stuff that we'll be putting up throughout the show. Lori's phone number at her office, as well as a website, not just to her individual website, but a website to the legislature as a whole. And from there, you can go through and click on anybody that you want, including Lori, and get to their own specific website pages. And there's a lot of other good information at that website too. So we'll be directing you there throughout the show as well. So anyway, welcome back. You have been in office now since, well, this is now technically November. It's hard to believe, but it's November 2nd as we're taping this.
10 months.
So, yep, you've been in office 10 months, something like that. Talk to us about how it's been. You know, a lot of interviewers will talk to elected officials after like the first 100 days, This is more like 200 and some odd days, but
right.
How's it been so far? Surprises? Good, bad, ugly?
All of the above.
Okay.
All of the above. Surprises and predictability and predictably unpredictable. And yes, 10 months. And in that 10 months, from inauguration January 3rd through the commencement of the significant budget process, which is, it's not like a city council budget in some ways. In other ways it is. But certainly that process, ran from the spring all the way up through the week of 4th of July. And then committee assignments in between, being back in the district. A lot of people ask me, so did you move to Madison? And I'm like, no, I represent you. I represent this district. I live in the district that I represent, but I am down in Madison, 2 to 3 days a week. And next week it might be 4, some weeks more than others. But then when I'm back here, I'm meeting with constituents, I'm holding office hours, I'm going to events, a lot of the same kinds of things, but on a different scale. Then there was this slight little lull for a couple of weeks in the summer after the budget to kind of gather your wits, catch up with in district, because as you know, many of the things that take place of these events that you want to connect with folks happen in the summer. Mm-hmm. And so then we were back at it, and the beginning of September, from then until now, and for the next couple of weeks, hundreds and hundreds of bills, the opportunity to sign on to, and so you are trying to digest and winnow and determine what you're going to sign on to, based on also trying to get feedback from folks in the district, and what does that look like for the greater good of the state.
Right. Yeah, well, and I was noticing, because when I did go to the state legislative website, I was noticing all these different bills. And I thought, oh, good grief. Now when you talk about a budget, are you talking about the next biennium budget? Because the 23 through 25 budget had already been approved, right? Or were you part of that approval process? I'm kind of losing track of the dates here.
Right. So this budget for 23-25 was not passed until July.
Okay.
But it started, well, I should say, it actually started for me even before I was inaugurated, because there was an opportunity to share with the governor's office, what items you'd kind of like to see. But so they start obviously much, much earlier. But then it wasn't until, I would say mid-spring before any of the, the governor's proposed budget made it to even Joint Finance Committee. And then the Joint Finance Committee, and I attended a couple of those public hearings throughout the state too. They would take it kind of on the road to have those discussions and listening sessions, but then they, made their changes, and then it came back through the assembly. And, there were some really, really hopeful, fantastic things that I thought were going to be really, really just unimaginable change for good in the governor's budget that were heartbreakingly removed by
Like
the Joint
what?
Finance. I mean, there were over 500 and some items that were removed. Number one, we're seeing some of the results of things that were removed, such as some of the funding for the UW system. We're feeling that pain literally right here in the district with some of those consequences.
Yep.
And, there were some really significant mental health. This was for the year of mental health. There were a number of things that made it through, but some that didn't. And then, of course, K through 12 education. That I think we ended up with like barely a 3% increase on, special education.
That's a drop in the bucket. That's nothing.
And now the really exciting thing, though, that kind of came outside of that process, though, was the shared revenue. And how many years have municipalities been looking at and pointing to the state and saying, we need more of that shared revenue to come back?
Yes. And so where are we at with it now?
So that did happen. And
how much of it's coming back?
20% is where Oshkosh sits. Now, that was the minimum. Now, some townships and other entities received significantly more, but in the scheme of things, being a smaller township may not have been as much, dollar-wise. But so that was a history-making, deal changer.
So 20% is what the city of Oshkosh is now going to get back.
But it has to be used in certain ways, and there were, unfortunately, some trade-offs in that process.
Here's the problem with this, Lori. And I don't know I think I know where the fault of this lies, but let's be realistic. This is our money that we're sending to Madison. Who are they to say what we should do with our money that they're giving back to us? It shouldn't be up to them. They should worry about their own stuff and let us spend our money where we best see fit. Do you know what I mean?
I hear what you're saying.
I think that's what should be happening. So that was you had to give that up to get some other trade-off?
No, it was in order to get that much.
No.
You had to, what happened is it impacted, like the Milwaukee situation with some things. It impacted policy in ways that were very unacceptable for many. And so not everybody, voted for that because of how much it was going to impact others in different ways. Yeah. But it was an opportunity that, and much negotiation that went into that, of course, with the governor's office and leadership on both sides. And so cities are very glad to see that come. Now,
well, I'm sure,
the counties too that have sales tax. Winnebago County is not one of them that has that 0.5% sales tax, but
yeah. Does Milwaukee County, they still have a 0.5 cent, don't they, or no?
They have not. No.
So their stadium is already.
Oh, I'm sorry. Milwaukee County, yes.
They have it.
Winnebago does not. Milwaukee does. Yes.
And does Brown County? I can't. It doesn't really matter. I just know that we're not one of them.
Right.
And but I mean a half cent.
But our county folks have said, at least, when we brought that up in the past before this shared revenue took place, oh, well, we don't need that half cent sales tax because we have so much surplus. That's
Let's
what the
talk
county
about
said.
the surplus.
No, that was county end, but I know you're going to the state surplus.
I'm going to jump
Yes.
around here a little bit.
Yep.
And then I'll circle back to some of these other questions. But let's talk about the surplus. Current surplus budget, surplus of $7 billion with a B dollars. How did we end up with such a huge surplus? I guess that's the first question. And then I'm going to go into my little diatribe.
Yeah. Well, and I think it should be, stated too that, more than half of that is already like assigned or allocated, dedicated. So really.
How can that be?
Prior commitments, as I understand it. Well, first of all, going back to your question, how did we end up with a surplus?
Yeah.
An overperformance of taxes paid in, that led to, and as I understand it, when stimulus dollars got, circulated, it's not just for that like $1,400 check in your pocket. It's like, okay, how does that impact and grow other things? But the question that came out of, well, what do we do with that? It's been my understanding that some of those commitments were from either budgetary, allocations, or that there were continuing contracts or obligations. So,
well, then they shouldn't call it a surplus.
And I will be honest with you, I do not know the fine detail there.
Yeah.
But from what I followed in the joint finance and then back to the assembly, and when we finally voted on the budget, I know that things that were anticipated that didn't make it in were in our higher ed. There were significant portions that the governor's budget had hoped for there,
Right.
in K-12, in mental health, and we saw some of those and not others. And some of the problems that our folks are experiencing could have been just with a swipe of the pen and the Joint Finance Committee solved. But there are these differences of opinion, which is probably an understatement, as to how
That's
to
a
spend
polite
that.
way of putting it. Sure, and we can talk about that. Governor Evers last year proposed a 10% middle class tax cut, and he actually put that into the 2023-25 biennium budget. Republicans said nope, they just ixnayed that. And instead, they countered with tax reform.
Flat tax, yeah.
Yes, that affected basically the richest of the rich, the two top tax brackets. And the governor vetoed that. So there we sit, at loggerheads and still the $7 billion surplus. Then, let's see, the governor's proposal would have created funds for child care centers.
Child care counts, yeah.
The university system, as you just mentioned, those are two big things. The Republicans didn't want that. And so they said no. So they countered it with the things that I just talked about. Well, let's take a look at what happens. If I saw Governor Evers talking about how the child care system in this state is on the brink of collapse. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out if it collapses, what are you going to do? You're going to have kids who aren't yet school age. They're going to be sitting at home. They can't stay home and care for themselves, so a parent has to be with them. That's going to be someone who's not going to work every day. Now, maybe, in all realistic in realistically looking at this, some of these parents may already be working from home, either full-time remote or maybe, a combination of a hybrid situation. But either way, if they're caring for their children, how can they be functioning at their job? So one way or the other, productivity is going to be impacted. And if they aren't already working at home, they're going to have to stay at home, which is pulling them out of the workforce altogether. And that's not helping business. So you've got Republicans who are all about business. Well, this is going to bite business in the butt, right? If this system collapses. So I don't understand why they can't see the big picture here.
Well, and what's really interesting too is when you're in the room with some of these folks, they will say, "Well, it's not the government's job to raise your children," But they may need to be, like you said, in person at work, and so well then just get grandma. Well, grandma might still be working too. Somebody's got to stay home. And, they may or may not. I mean, many folks have returned in person for work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there are some interesting, I think, ways of addressing it. But the bottom line is we heard from child care centers, both large and small, that without those child care counts dollars, they would be either closing or having to reduce staff. The unfortunate thing is that the Republican answer to that was, oh, well, let's just introduce bills then that would allow younger caregivers in the daycare centers with larger numbers in the ratio of children. Like, oh, let's have 16-year-olds with 8 kids. And turn them loose, or let's change, let's give some kind of revolving loan to expand the center. Well, that still doesn't, change the fact that somebody's got to watch those kids too.
Right. I have an idea, and I don't know that it would work for most businesses, but you're familiar with Thrivent up in Appleton, formerly Aid Association for Lutherans, I believe. And I think they were probably a trendsetter in this many, many years ago, because for years they have had an on-site daycare. Now, I don't know the particulars involved there. I don't know if employees pay anything or if this is just a straight up benefit or a perk for working there. But they were, I think, one of the first people in this neck of the woods, one of the first businesses to have something like that. I mean, I would be supportive of a taxpayer. I would be supportive of tax credits being given to businesses that start on-site daycare centers. Again, I don't know how many businesses could realistically do that. I mean, if you've got a business that maybe has 15 employees, I don't think that that's going to work.
Well, and I can tell you that
it's a thought, and
we
it's a start.
We actually saw this here. UW Oshkosh had a child care center, which they closed. Well, actually, the YMCA ended up, I think, moving in, and I don't know if it's leasing or purchased or whatever. But think about it. That business may not necessarily have the expertise of running a child care center. Right. And the staffing, I mean, the staff that work in child care centers. Matter of fact, my granddaughter right now just applied to work at the one of the local daycare centers. She's not quite 18 though yet, so she won't be able to actually, I think, get in there until a little after that. But the pay, I think, is somewhere between like 12 and 13 an hour. So you don't have as many folks like doing that. There's already a struggle for talent, no matter whether you're a young person caregiver or an elderly person caregiver, or you're in the service industry or whatever. So, that struggle is real no matter if you're a small child care center or a large one. But many of the folks who came and testified at some of these hearings, I mean, they are saying, like, I think somewhere in the neighborhood of like 30% of child care centers were potentially going to close if they were not able to continue the child care counts. And the governor did propose another alternative, and these other things that are coming back from the the majority are not in line with that. They're saying, well, let's just open more home daycares and give people money to expand their garage,
They don't have a clue. I mean, it's just comments like that demonstrate so clearly that they don't have a clue what they're talking about. And you know what I think? I think we have to get back to some basics here with these lawmakers. And they need to stop being politicians, and they need to stop catering to the people who are stuffing money in their pockets, and the lobbyists who are stuffing money in their pockets. And they need to start focusing on doing their job, and that is for we the people. And I'm going to use that expression probably a few times tonight, because frankly, I'm pretty pissed about everything that's going on. And I'm certainly not alone, and I know you hear this from probably more people than you care to even think about.
Well, it would make a big difference if folks were selecting their representatives rather than their representatives selecting the voters. That would make a difference. If
Are you talking about the gerrymandering?
Fair maps.
Of the mapping? Okay, well, that's on my list to talk about too. But, maybe these lawmakers need to actually be forced to visit daycare centers and actually talk to people in daycare centers and get an understanding of what goes into becoming a daycare worker and what they have. And they have to spend a day there. Make them spend a day there, seeing what goes on and the challenges that these workers have to deal with day in and day out. And then maybe they would shut up a little bit with making these stupid comments that these fools are making, and they would understand what really is going on here. And then maybe we'd get some meaningful legislation moved forward.
Well, and certainly what there's one thing that really stuck in my mind from one of the days of action where, like, child care center staff and owners came from, like, near and far, and I mean Superior to Prairie du Chien. They were saying, we grow brains, as they are carried, and to be categorized as, just like babysitters. It's dismissive, it's disrespectful.
Yes.
And these are the folks that are literally growing young brains. So I agree with you.
And I would put all educators in that, not just in daycare centers, but
they're preparing them for going into school, right? Getting them school ready.
You mentioned a day of action. What's a day of action?
Oh, okay. So one of the really cool things that I get to do when I'm down in Madison is host or welcome people who are there visiting their legislators regarding advocacy around, it could be anything from social issues, dementia, healthcare, education, reading, you name it. And so this particular day of action was one where a number of daycare providers had come from all over the state and convened at the Capitol outside. There's like some media attention and that kind of thing. And then they, had their different signs, and then they go in, meet with legislators, and also go around and share what it is that they would like to see happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So I've
That
seen
is
a
kind
number
of a
of
neat
those.
thing.
Yeah. It could be moms demand action on the gun issue. Excuse me. The child care issue. I mean, a number of things. And so I guess you could say, while the lobbyists who represent different entities also come and visit us, right, on things that are of interest to them.
Sure.
You also have regular folks who are just trying to live their lives and run their business or take care of people who show up to the Capitol, and they take a lot of time to come and attend public hearings also.
And, you know, and I'll digress for just a minute here about the lobbyists. Now, I think that lobbyists, to a degree, are important because no one understands their cause quite like they do. So I get that. But by the same token, that doesn't mean that their opinion or their dollars should have any more importance or significance than the opinions and the dollars of John and Joe citizen, or Julie and Jennifer citizen. It just, I mean, we after all are the ones paying their salaries, you know, and we are the ones that they were elected
The representative salaries, yeah.
Yes, yeah, that's what I meant. And so, and we are the ones that they were elected to serve, and who they took an oath to serve. And I'm sorry, most of these people in Madison right now, or Washington, D.C., because the breakdown is everywhere, it's a sickness, and it needs to be eradicated. It really does.
I have to say, though, that going back to one of the things that has surprised me is that, you know, I was, excuse me, expecting to, you know, go into the Shark Tank. And, but one of the things that surprised me is there are, especially among the first-year legislators, some folks on the other side who also want to work together and solve problems for people. But they might say, oh, but leadership, you know, may take away, you know, my staff, or
sure, see, they're afraid.
But the conversations are very encouraging about things such as marijuana or abortion care, or things that I was like, oh my gosh, wow, you know, they have an interest too. And so I have hope that, and things have a little bit different tone from what I understand from second and third year legislators who have been around for a while, that there's still antics and shenanigans that go on, but there are definitely, there's a bit of a different tone with efforts to work together on some of these issues. So I think that was one of the things that surprised me the most, is how we have, you know, bipartisan coffees and talk to each other as human beings.
Well,
and
that's
people
good.
are polite.
But then when people are afraid of having their staff taken away by leadership, so on and so forth, that's the kind of fear tactics that breed gridlock. And then we're right back to square one with nothing being done. And I think, whether it's at a state level or a federal level, if these people don't want to do their jobs and they don't want to start putting forth some meaningful legislation instead of this feel-good legislation that makes them appear relevant or makes them to themselves feel relevant, because maybe they think they're really doing something good here, because they're that jaded. If they don't want to do the job that they were elected to do, then I think maybe we need to start taking back our country, and let's start having government by referendum. We start putting things on a ballot. You people in Madison, you people in Washington, you don't want to do anything meaningful in the way of gun control? Fine. Then have the stones to put it on a ballot, or we the people will find a way to put it on a ballot, and we the people will decide what we want in this country and in this state. And okay, we get one thing passed by a referendum, fine. Now let's legislate something else by referendum. And pretty soon, these lawmakers, I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about the people who have been there so long that they don't even know what they're doing anymore. They're not doing anything, really, except taking up space. Then maybe they'll start to realize that, gosh, if we're going to have government by referendum, maybe they don't need us after all, and maybe we better start doing what we were elected to do.
Accountability, and obviously that's talked about in every, no matter whether or not you're at the local level, you know, on the school board, the county board, city council, state, on up to our national, our U.S. representatives. Accountability to the voters is it's unquestionably important. But when you have a gerrymander situation, that accountability doesn't quite hold up the same way, does it?
Let's talk about that, because I don't think a lot of people really understand what that is. What I hear people saying is, well, what difference does it make how the maps are drawn? Everyone still has a vote. This is, I mean, honestly, this is what I'm hearing. And people don't understand the importance of the districting, the proper districting of these maps. And there's a lawsuit right now. It is Clark with an E. It's here somewhere. I think it's Clark, right? Clark with an E versus the Wisconsin Election Commission.
Yeah, I believe the League of Women Voters are
filed in August. There were 16 plaintiffs. It was filed in August. And, you know, it's...
And I believe that the Supreme Court oral arguments are going to begin on that. If I recall, the AG, Josh Call, mentioned on public radio the other day, oral arguments begin, I think it's November 21st.
So a few weeks from now.
And, you know, there is a very real possibility that we may be looking at a totally different set of circumstances, you know, come January.
But explain for folks what this is and why it's important.
So what was proposed, and you know, this is where it's important to have conversations with people about some of these details, because one of the other things that I've been surprised to see is that sometimes these bills come through and they look so appealing, like, oh, of course, this makes sense. But then there are these other pieces to it, the poison pills that come in, that completely change what the intent, or it does something completely different. This is what was presented to us on the proposal with the redistricting, that it was an Iowa model, but there were some very distinct differences in how that would actually occur, that were, you know, we have a different constitution than Iowa. There's a different legislative calendar, but more specifically, that in the end, what was proposed here was going to end up having a final say by the legislature and not the Supreme Court. And so that was, you know, well, all that did would end up being this kind of dilatory delay in coming to the same potentially result.
But explain to people, Lori, what this really is, because like I said, people come to me and they say, I don't see where it matters. Nobody can take my vote away, no matter where I am in a district map.
So there's this thing called like pack and crack. So
pack and crack?
Yeah, I think that's the term, where districts are either packed or cracked. And then so if the lines are drawn in such a way, it can either dilute or concentrate a particular demographic. And some of the arguments, and I'm not an attorney, but some of the arguments center around whether or not it's compact or contiguous, the district. So like if you look at the 54th Assembly District, for example, it kind of looks a little bit like Swiss cheese, especially up around the edges. For instance, now you have some of the correctional facilities that are in the 54th that used to be in the 53rd, but it's not necessarily connected to the next part of. Now, in that particular case, there's another bill that's coming through about prison gerrymandering. So folks who are counted in the population, who may be incarcerated, but they don't have a vote. But they're part of your district also has an aspect to it that relates to population. And so, you know, there are all these around the edges detail that are not really clear to the average, you know.
Right, and I can still hear people, when they see this show, they're gonna come back to me and say, but I still don't understand. I still have one vote. I'm still one person. I still have one vote. They can't take that away from me. So,
But if you're drawn out of the districts, if you, let's say there was a software program that was able to identify, how you voted, and how your neighbor across the street voted, and then the lines got changed so that it heavily favored one particular party over another, or it cut some out, then that weakens your vote. I mean, otherwise, how do you end up? Well, you have a significant higher number of folks voting Democratic, but you end up with more Republican representatives.
Does this ultimately, because I'm not a district mapping expert, does this ultimately, long-term, play into how electoral college votes are figured into the mix?
Now you're testing.
Because I can see how that could play a factor in things.
Before I would even try to, I don't even want to try and guess at that, but what I want to say is that the other piece of what was proposed by the Republicans on this was not going to include congressional districts, which was also another distinction from the Iowa model. And so that was, why it's one of the reasons they're saying, well, you guys wanted this Iowa model, and that's what they called it, but it wasn't. So I'm sorry, I can't answer the electoral connection at this point in time.
That's fine. Well, I can't even believe that we're down to like 22 minutes, Lori. I can't even believe this. So we're
hopping all over the place, Cheryl.
Let's talk about some specific things here. As a state, are we moving any closer to having broadband internet available for everybody? Because we got a lot of people out in rural areas who can't get any internet. And then we've got other people who have access to internet, but a lot of people who can't afford it, even though for a year or two, maybe a little even a longer period than that, a lot of people have been able to get like a $30 a month credit toward their internet connectivity. But still things are unaffordable.
Well, they changed the rates too after a certain period on that, I think. If I understand.
You mean the cable companies?
No, the what is that called? It's not the ACA. I can't remember what it's called.
Oh, I know what you mean.
The federal reduced rate internet access. That's like you said. It's like $30 a month or whatever. But I think it's only for like
$50.
Okay.
I think, I'm not sure, but I think at one time it was $50 a month, but now I know it's $30 a month. But even at that, things keep changing, and
there are big investments. From what I understand, both from the federal and from our state budget, investments in broadband, and interestingly. There was another internet company that was coming into Oshkosh. I think it was TDS, who was starting to do some work here and lay fiber and that. And as I understand it, I believe they kind of stopped midway. They ran into some issues with some of the concrete shortage last year as they were trying to fill in some of the holes. But I don't recall what the final say was, but it was my understanding that they started to do some, and then they stopped kind of midway. But in any event, yes, there is progress being made, and I will tell you that you were asking me about what committees I'm on. I serve on the Environment Committee, Forestry, Park and Rec, Mental Health and Substance and Alcohol Prevention, and then the Regulatory and Licensing Committee. Okay. Which that's for all of your licensed and permitted professional occupations. I think there's over 200 that have to get this. And then very recently, I was appointed to the Artificial Intelligence, the Speaker's Task Force on Artificial Intelligence. So all that is to say, circling back around to that, is yesterday we had our second public hearing on artificial intelligence in Green Bay.
About that.
And one of the things that was brought up is there's still that need in the rural areas to reach up to par. But I will tell you, I live right downtown Oshkosh, and there are times when our broadband is just, and we've got high speed, all the whatever modems and everything, but you can have, what do I want to say, weak, lower gigabytes per second or whatever it is. And
well, you contact Spectrum and you tell them all about that.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And
Have fun with that.
Yeah.
You're going to get a chat bot. You're going to get an AI chat bot in the process.
Yeah. It's interesting. The whole thing is interesting.
But there is progress being made. Are we there yet? No.
All right. Okay, I want to talk about affordable housing. I know that we've made progress in Oshkosh with these tiny homes and the tiny home village and so forth. My problem with that is that it's only temporary housing for these folks. It's meant to be transitional housing. I would like to see, and as our representative here, I'm asking that you consider doing something about this. Put forth some meaningful legislation that puts up affordable housing for people who can afford that housing. We do not need more big apartment buildings. Look at all the apartment buildings that we have seen go up in Oshkosh just in the last couple of years or so. And they're great. They have all these amenities, but you can't find, I know some of them, they have like a studio apartment maybe starting at $800, $850, $900 a month.
If you can find that.
Yes, that is ridiculous.
There's a less than...
That is not affordable housing. I'm talking about something that is truly affordable. That's why it's called affordable. So why can't we get something going where, I know we're kind of landlocked because of the lake and, we can't infringe on certain townships and so forth to the west of us. But, let's start putting up some affordable housing instead of market rate housing.
So here's the thing. It's affordable for whom, right? I think what we're referring to is affordable
to
for
low and middle class.
Okay. So there's your low income, your very low income, and extremely low income, and what's affordable is deemed to be 30% roughly of your income.
Right.
And then there's this kind of like middle section of workforce housing, right? And it depends on which workforce you're talking about. Yeah. And the housing study that was done a couple of years ago that has started to be implemented, we've started changing some codes to make the building of homes a little less costly, although at the same time, the cost for labor and materials and per square foot is like 200 and something per square foot.
Yeah.
But what I want to say is that the sales of many of the even older housing stock that would be affordable for somebody, who makes under $25,000 a year, or who makes under $40,000 a year, you now need to make wages around $20 an hour to afford some of these.
Can't afford that.
These rents, or given that the shortage is not unique to Oshkosh, but certainly we have an exacerbation of it, especially since a number of these have been sold. And I just want to talk about, there are some good things that came out of the legislature this year, and that is this package of workforce housing bills. And one of those things is about converting commercial space to residential.
Okay.
Another one was about converting like Main Street space to residential, and some home ownership additional incentives in that. And that was bipartisan. Now, that doesn't necessarily fix the problem now. And, one of the other pieces is that because when you have a shortage and you're not keeping up with the building of the units, what happens is people who are in the middle hang on to their spots, their rentals or their homes, longer than the ability to filter, let's say, up, which prevents someone in that lower income bracket from filtering on into that middle. So the stock itself has to increase. Now, one of the things that Oshkosh did at the city level was to change the code to allow for accessory dwelling units. And so, conversions of attics and basements and, having these additional. Well, there was actually a gentleman who I think purchased I want to say a duplex that he was remodeling in the last 6 months or so, and adding in above a garage, for example, Now that was not previously allowable.
Right.
So it's a combination of your zoning and your ordinances at the local level and some of the state dollars. And so WEDA, this Wisconsin Housing
Economic Development Corporation.
That's WEDIC. WEDA is the housing side
authority or association, whatever.
So, but in any event, what I have been doing, and I'm proud of the fact that last week we rolled out, my first bills that relate to tenant protections, and we have a long history of
you and I do,
rental
yes,
housing on that, and many of these are about repealing some of the local control preemption that the legislature did in a number of years. But a number of these are also, like one of my bills is about allowing municipalities to shorten the short-term rental to less than 180 days, because in 2017, I believe it was, the legislature statutes were started restricting municipalities' ability to do that. Basically, we need to get rid of that and give the power back to communities, because when you have short-term rentals like Airbnb and VRBO, and those are being purchased so that they can just rent out for, 6 months out of the year, that takes it off the market. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with Airbnbs, but there needs to be local control and decision making on that.
Right.
Otherwise, you have very large entities who are able to, chip away, or what I call the death by 1,000 cuts at our housing stock.
Well, here's the problem with some of these big developments that have been going up. And I'm not picking on this one in particular, but there's one called Mill on Main, and it's supposed to be on 7th Avenue, but where 7th Avenue continues on the other side of South Main Street. And in that general area. I did an article for a business publication over a year ago on that development that was supposedly breaking ground like almost right then, and it was going to be done in 3 phases. I don't think they've broken ground to this day, and it was going to be this huge complex. It was going to have a dog park. It was going to have all these wonderful amenities, but market rate rents, and when I say market rate rents, I'm talking about what most of these places are charging now. I don't believe that people can sustain those kinds of rents for very long. I don't know why they haven't broken ground yet, but I have my own suspicions. There's also another one that had started being built, and I don't think they're full either, and that's in a different place in town. But instead of trying to put up these places that you can't have people long-term sustaining those kinds of rents, don't be so greedy, right up front. Go for long-term rent and long-term tenants and put up something that the majority of people can afford. People like me, people like you, people like those who work on my crew, and most of the people in this community. And then I think you'll have something that's more sustainable. We all want things that are sustainable. Well, build things that people can long-term sustain their living in them. You know what I mean? I mean, this is...
Yeah, well, I did hear, actually just here this past week in some conversations with some local developers that they are behind on like commercial or multi-family housing, these special kind of what are they, breaker panels, I think, for like electricity, because it's not the same construction as, you know, a single family home, and that they're an 18-month lead time to get these particular panels.
Well, okay.
Which means, like, if you're planning to put, you know, shovel in the ground and have something built, you know, a year from now, it's not going to happen without those things.
Well, right,
they don't
but
want
I don't
them
even
sitting.
see shovels in the ground yet, and this was supposed to have happened a year ago.
So what I was
So-
told was that, like, some things you do not want, you know, like your foundation and your framing and all of that sitting for months at a time exposed to the weather before you can, you know, do the finish pieces. Now, that's just one example, but I
Yeah.
agree with you that
I hear it as an excuse. You know, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, Lori. I'm just saying I think that far too often, I think people use things that happen to come up that are just circumstance, and they use them as an excuse of why something hasn't happened or this hasn't. You know, this particular development ground was going to be broken, and it never happened. You know.
I think there were also some modifications, if I recall, and this was after I was no longer on council, but it's my understanding that the one that you're referring to, I think, also had some changes in some of their agreements
That could be,
too.
but there were some other buildings also around town.
Yep.
So I guess my bottom line here is just let's try and build things that normal, everyday, I go to work, I do my job, I work hard for my money kind of person can afford. And
Well, there's some other interesting things that some communities are doing too with these. What do I want to say? Think about the Sears home catalog. You know, post World War II. You know, you could basically choose from, you know, these 8 different options. You know, under 1,000 square feet or 800 square feet
Yeah.
or whatever, and boom, it comes in this kit and so on. Well, they're now looking at a number of communities. These predetermined, yes, these plans are approved, and here's a list of options that someone can build. The plans are already approved, kind of thing, to save money on construction A and to speed up the process B from, you know, some of the
Yeah.
other pieces. But what I'm hearing is that builders are not as likely to build those modest things because the margin isn't as profitable.
that's my point. That's what I said before.
From the
They're
single family home
greedy.
piece of it.
They're greedy. And I realize that's single family homes, but still, it comes down to greed. And I'm going to leave it at that. Let's talk, because God, we're running out of time. We're down to like 7 or 8 minutes. Legalization of marijuana. Where are we moving at with this? We've got people on every side of us, it seems, who have legalized marijuana.
Yeah, we are an island. We certainly are. And as a matter of fact, as we're sitting here recording this, Senator Agard, who's been the champion of much of this, is over at the library, or was very in the last hour or so, on her grassroots tour, talking about the newest iteration of her legislation that she's been working on with regard to full legalization. And it's a little bit, as I understand it, different in what's been introduced in the past, but certainly there are young folks, and I have seniors coming to my office hours telling me that for their pain condition or their multiple health conditions, that they are driving 2 hours away to go get what they need to address their medical conditions. And, you know, Wisconsin is losing out on the medical and
Right.
the recreational.
Yep. And the other part of it is if we were able to pass this, you know, then it could be taxed and it could be controlled.
Regulated, safer.
Yep, exactly. Okay. God, I don't even know where to go in such short little time here. Let's talk about gun control. I know that that's a federal issue. It's a hot button issue. But, You know, how many people need to die before we do something? And I don't want to hear from people, oh, you can't take away my guns. I don't want to take away anybody's guns. I want certain things to be put in place so that semi-automatic weapons can't be turned into these weapons that are firing a gazillion rounds in a minute, you know.
Yes.
We don't need that. And if you need that, then you got bigger problems than a fully automatic weapon can handle and fix. So can't we start doing something on a statewide basis?
Well, we certainly can, and as a matter of fact, there's a very substantial package that is being rolled out that has everything from, you know, your universal background checks to the bump stock, I don't know, reducer or whatever it's called.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And a number of, you know, things that I think we see these come out each year, and you know, with each successive horrible event that occurs, it's like, how are we not moving further along in safety and responsible? You know, there are a number of folks who are Democrats who own guns and they hunt and they, you know, believe in safe storage, and it's not about removing all guns.
Exactly.
It's about the responsible use,
right,
and whether or not folks who are not well have access to them.
Right.
Whether or not you can store them safely at a gun shop when you're not feeling so great.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. God, we didn't cover most of what I wanted to get to. We could have 2 hours, and we still probably wouldn't get to it.
But I know you wanted to ask me about, you know, the legislation that I have either authored, co-authored, co-sponsored, and it's probably in the hundreds in terms of like signing on as a co-sponsor. Mm-hmm. But literally, we have this massive spreadsheet that, as those opportunities of new bills come through, that we're reviewing like every couple of days. And this time of year is the season of much giving on that.
Yeah.
There are a lot. And so I have signed on as co-sponsor, and then I've also co-authored and more recently taken lead on, like I say, these tenant protection bills. One is about, you know, Wisconsin law says...
We're almost out of time, Lori.
Yeah.
So
shortening, lengthening the time in which a month-to-month tenancy to 60 days rather than 30, because 30 days isn't enough time now to find a place because of the shortage.
Right.
Changing that.
Okay. One other thing that I would like to see this state work on, and that is some meaningful election law reform, so that out-of-state money can't come
Campaign
into the
finance
state.
reform.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And limiting how much companies can donate to campaigns. Mm-hmm. I think we have to start doing something, because, you know, otherwise you've got candidates who can't even get a place on the debate stage because they're not part of the two-party system. And gosh, I'd like to do away with the party system altogether, but that's another conversation. So anyway, I'd like to have you back in about 6 months rather than, you know, this year, so that we can talk about some of this stuff.
I think that we'll be, you know, wrapping up session, you know, around April.
Okay.
So that would be probably a good time to like reconnect.
Good. Let's do it.
And kind of review the end of this session, because we've still got, you know, a few months left in this session.
All right. We're going to set that date before you leave tonight. All right, that is going to do it for us. Thanks so much for being here. I'm sorry we ran out of time, but we're going to make up for it.
Well, you had a lot to cover, and
we'll make up for it.
Not having it ahead of time, I don't know what we're going to talk about.
Anyway, thank you. We'll have you back soon. That's going to do it for us. Thanks to Lori, thanks to the crew, thanks to you. We will see you next time. Until then, take good care. Keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.